Now we're going to finish up this painting, and we're going to finish painting our bunny and the grass in the foreground of the path. And really, that's all we have left. So here I am adding a watery brush and a half full brush of white paint to the brown that I have for the bunny's fur. And I'll use this as a highlight for the bunny. Thinking about areas that are close to the light, close to the sun, which we remember is behind our head as the viewer. So those are the spots that are going to be most well lit. And I've got some shadows that I painted on that got a little bit too dark, and I'm going to add those. Notice that I'm pulling my brush at a pretty shallow angle, and I've got a lot of the bristle touching the paper. This helps to get the furry texture. Next, I'm going to do a mostly dry brushing with just a little bit of yellow paint. I like to use yellow as a sunny highlight. You could use white or a tan if you'd rather, but I think the yellow gives a nice fun kind of character, and it matches what I had on the tree. So I'm going to use the fan brush for that, trying to keep my brush strokes running this direction that they belong running in the body. So that requires thinking a little bit about the logic of how the fur grows on the rabbit. So around the eye, the fur and the highlights are going to be arcing in short lines growing away from the eye. On the body, they're going to head from the front toward the back or down, heading downward as we get onto any of the legs. I'm going to blend these in. I'm going to try not to have the yellow be really strong and bright. And then I'm going to paint a black circle for the eye. Now it's going to just be a circle that's black. I'm going to put a lot less paint just up in the very top sort of right hand section up toward the corner. Later on I will paint a little highlight in there, but I'm going to let that area dry a little bit. So I'm going to paint a little dot of white in, but I'm going to wait a little while so that it doesn't get too smudged up. While I'm waiting, I'm going to paint the shadow on the bunny because I think the color of the rabbit and the color of the path are pretty similar. So I'm going to take a little bit of black and some water, and with my brush that has a little bit of maybe some brown in it as well. And I'm going to trace this. Now, with the shadow, we can kind of get away with a lot. We don't have to have it be super perfect. We want to have at least a couple of shadows that help to make a sense of consistency. We want the shadow to be heading away from the light. And we want to keep it somewhat reflecting the shape of the object that's casting the shadow. Now, it doesn't have to be super perfect. Shadows often get distorted. Certainly they do in real life, so why wouldn't they in a painting? But we want to keep similar relationships between similar shapes. So I've got one big curve for the bunny's back and body, and I've got a little bit of a hint for the rest of it. I'm going to put the head in on top of, following that same sort of logic. And I want to make sure that I can see my path through the shadow. I don't want to be covering everything. It's a pretty thin, light, watered down effect. And I'm going to fill the whole thing in, take a little time to blend it, make sure that it's not too dark. I want the whole thing to be fairly consistent, so I'm going to go back in and work it, take my paper towel to it a little bit to try to keep it pretty consistent. Having at least one other good sized shadow that reinforces the pattern or the direction that the shadow runs is a good way to build some unity and consistency in your picture. So I'm going to give a shadow to this big tall tree that we have over in the midground. Trying to keep it going at about the same angle that it was before. Making sure that I've taken my time with the shadow. I don't want to rush it. I don't mind going back and working it, taking a little off, putting a little bit more back on. I want to be able to see the path and the texture of the path through the shadow, but have it all be distinct and darker. I want the shadow to be fairly consistent within itself. Shadows usually are pretty consistent. Then I'm going to make up a color for the blade of grass, and I'm going to add a brush full each of green and yellow paint to the color that I already had, the greenish color that I already have going on. I'm going to use that as my base color for this. So for this blade of grass, I'm going to have it folded over in front of us. So I'm going to have it with a square top and then fold it over to the front. And I'm going to create that effect with a little bit of shading that I'll paint in with a blue paint in a little bit. Trying to keep the shape and structure of a blade of grass in mind. Then I'm going to add a touch of blue, and I'm going to mix some of that into the paint that I have on my brush. So I'm not going to mix it into my whole well of paint, just what I already have to mix a deep blue-green. I'm going to draw a line where the blade of grass is folded over itself, and I'm going to blend this with my paintbrush into the already wet green paint, so I'm keeping the deepest part of the shadow, the bluest, darkest part up toward the top where I first drew the line, and I'm gently fading it or mixing it with the green of the rest of the blade of grass here. Because this is a foreground element, I want to have that shading be really nice and crisp, have it really look quite nice. Then I'm going to go in with the back of my paintbrush, and I'm going to do a little bit of a scratching away or a reduction for a vein down the center of the leaf. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to put a little dot of white in the eye of the bunny, making it feel a lot more round. I'm going to mix up a little bit of a lighter brown, and I'm going to paint on the inside of the ear with that. I'm also going to do the eyelids with that. Unfortunately, when I paint it here in this video, my black in the eye was a little bit too wet. When I'm on the eye, or when I'm on the ear up there, make sure that you get a nice little bit of feathery texture. Bunny's fur in their ears is kind of a little bit fluffy right around the base of the ear, and that's a kind of a nice convincing little detail. So here I am mixing up that lighter brown to make for the eyelid of the bunny. Using a tiny brush at a very steep angle, only painting with the very tip. And even though I'm being very careful, I end up making a little bit of a mistake on the top. And it blends some of the black from the eyeball into that. Now I have to clean that up. Once I'm done with that, I have to blend a little bit of a brownish green color, and I'm going to use that to scumble in the forest floor down by the leaves, or the blades of grass that I've just painted. I realized I'd forgotten to add those in. My next step, one of the last that I'm going to do, is going to be to mix up a bright yellow-green, just a little bit, with a slightly neutralized green, so maybe one of my brownish greens, or a touch of tiny little bit of red, some kind of green that has a little bit of brownishness to it, mixing that with the yellow to make a really bright highlight. I'm going to paint that just on the inside edge of the blades of grass. I'm outlining just that edge nearest the sun for both blades. For the very last thing, I'm going to use my smallest brush at a very steep angle with careful hands to paint some white whiskers coming out of the bunny's eye, or bunny's nose rather. I'm just going to curve up and over. I'm going to put a few from the other side as well, but the nose is overlapping most of that, so I'm not going to show a whole lot of detail there, just a little hint of those ones. And that's it.